This is the theme of Setback and Misery, special topic on goal orientation, select frames. So let's look at a special topic. So I wanted to get into goal orientation. So let's look at Annie Wilkes's performance goal orientation, Paul Sheldon's learning goal orientation, Chef Buster's learning goal orientation, and then the writer director's performance goal orientation. And we're going to get into the differences. So what is goal orientation theory? Goal orientation theory is related to motivation, and it provides a framework for understanding behavioral intentions and strategies that determine how students, for example, approach and engage in a learning activity. For example, if students desire to pass a course with an A, we may measure those students' motivations based on their willingness to look good to other students or their willingness to learn for learning's sake. The goal will determine achievement of mastery. This means that students may be extrinsically motivated, exhibiting a performance goal orientation, or intrinsically motivated, applying a learning goal orientation. The adoption of a goal orientation reveals mindset. So if you think about Annie has a performance goal orientation because she's not willing to learn for learning's sake. She's willing to demonstrate what a nurse would do in a given situation, but the situation with Paul requires learning. And so in the same way that her time at the maternity ward required learning, the babies, instead of learning about what is upsetting the babies and making them cry, she decides to strangle them. Instead of learning about Paul and why he would be interested in writing a whole new book, she decides to make him burn his book and also utilize any violence to keep him there. So she's strangling both. She's strangling the babies and she's strangling Paul, right? So she has a performance goal orientation. She's not willing to learn. Where you see Sheriff Buster, he initially has a performance goal orientation to do things in the same way he's always done them, but he's willing to change his mindset into a learning goal orientation where he's willing to learn something different so that he could accomplish his goal, right? And then that means that he has better intrinsic motivation. So let's look at it. So what is learning goal orientation? So learning goal orientation is defined as the desire to pursue competence and mastery in a subject matter. Because competence is developed over time, students and individuals alike develop ways and strategies to increase their knowledge through effortful learning. They tend to be intrinsically motivated. Students setting learning goals place a higher value on learning, are more inclined to be self-regulated through self-monitoring, and engage in challenging tasks, spending effortful time on completing the tasks. Students with a learning goal orientation perceive failure as possible, but understand that more time should be spent on adopting an intrinsic motivation to learn the material and adopting a positive attitude towards assignments and tasks. They understand that task difficulty is part of learning. They often apply a growth mindset towards goal completion. So that's a lot to take in, but let's look at the competence angle for a minute. Paul Sheldon does have competence and mastery in terms of writing the 8 novels, right? Writing the series. He wrote it, right? But when he is forced to rewrite or extend or write Misery's Return, and he writes that first draft, his competence and mastery is challenged by Annie, because remember, Annie knows. She knows the books, right? She knows the series. So Annie demonstrates more competence and mastery in Paul Sheldon's work than Paul Sheldon. Sometimes you can just write and be a great writer and know the subject matter, study the subject matter, but not really have a passion for the work that if you were asked a question, would you be able to answer it? In terms of competence and mastery with Annie, Annie strangles the problem before she resolves it. So the babies are crying, that's a problem. Well, babies cry. So then she should now go talk to a supervisor, a supervising nurse, maybe consult some books, talk to a psychologist, understand why babies cry. She's not willing to do that. She's not willing to pursue competence and mastery in the subject matter of crying babies. They're crying because they may be hungry. They're crying because they may have attachment issues. They need their mama, right? They need their parents, their caregiver. And instead of learning about that, the only thing she's willing to do is strangle. She's also not willing to address her own sort of intent in being a nurse, that you are now taking your hands and putting those hands around a baby and strangling a baby, and nothing in her sort of yells out, why am I putting my hands on a baby? So there's some competence and mastery issues in both Annie and Paul Sheldon, Annie Wilkes and Paul Sheldon. Then of course Buster, sort of not increasing his professional knowledge base, right? We don't see Buster talking to the state trooper and having a conversation with him. We still see Buster going off on his own, examining the car, examining the trees, examining things from a sort of isolated point of view. I'm going to do it the way I'm going to do it. So that means that lessens the impact of your competence and mastery in subject matter. And the subject matter changed. So he was willing to read books on Paul Sheldon, rather read Paul Sheldon's books to learn about him, but he wasn't willing to learn more about Annie Wilkes, right? So competence and mastery is a interesting thing, right? So then the task difficulty for Annie would have been how do I resolve this baby crying thing? The task difficulty for Paul Sheldon would be, how do I resolve this idea that I didn't want to make misery my life, right? And then how do I resolve task difficulty for Sheriff Buster? How do I resolve embracing the idea or not embracing the idea that I need help, right? That I can't do this alone. Deputizing your wife keeps you safe. It doesn't keep you focused conscientiously on the particular task and how to solve it, right? I'm not saying that the wife is not useful, but it's convenient, right? And she's not going to really challenge you as much because you are the sheriff and you are her wife. So when you have a learning goal orientation, it reflects your ability or your inclination towards a growth mindset. And we are going to get into that as well, because you set a goal, you endure a goal, you complete the goal. So with Annie doesn't understand how to nurse someone to recovery, right? She doesn't understand that. Something in her gets mixed up with her own biases and things she wants to do, and she's not concerned about the immediate goal, which is to nurse Paul Sheldon to recovery, or nurse him to a part of the recovery process and then hand it over to the experts at the hospital who can then resolve the issue. What is performance goal orientation? So performance goal orientation is defined as measuring one's competence compared to others. Students who set a performance goal desire to appear competent to others or appear less competent to others. They tend to be extrinsically motivated. Students setting performance goals are more concerned with demonstrating their abilities in contrast and or in comparison to their academic counterparts. Students with a performance goal orientation tend to avoid failure by not engaging in an activity, feeling frustration with failure when failure might be imminent. They attribute success to external factors, especially to such beliefs about luck. They are more inclined to focus on the difficulty of the task than on the possibility of completion. They often reflect a fixed mindset about goal completion. So this is Annie all the way. If this is not anybody, this is definitely Annie, that she measures her competence compared to others. And when you remember Paul Sheldon reading the newspaper clippings in the photo album, you see that one student who had honors, who garnered honors, ended up dying somehow suspiciously, and then Annie was the one raised up to have honors, or promoted to have honors, right? That she measured her competence compared to others, right? And that goes on about 2 instances. And when you think about Paul Sheldon, does he measure his competence compared to others? Well, if he wants to be a serious writer, he wants to be taken seriously, he wants to write something worthy of putting on his tombstone. So there may be an implicit comparison to other writers, maybe in his genre, who are writing much more seriously and gaining more praise. So that's just implicit. He doesn't talk about anyone who is sort of writing a serious type of work at a highly competent level, because if you want to do something new, you have to begin studying it and begin outlining and thinking about it and researching and discussing, right? He doesn't mention anybody. When he is speaking with his agent in the office before he goes to New York, he doesn't discuss sort of like a specific genre of work where he wants to be taken seriously. It's not like he wants to begin writing a biography or historical biographies, or writing on a president, or any other, writing on, say, the American Revolution or so. He's not talking about a specific thing. He's just essentially saying, I just want to be taken seriously as a writer. So he's suggesting that what he has been doing with Misery is not serious work, even though it requires a fair amount of good research, right? He doesn't seem to think that it is worthy of anything. So if he doesn't think it's worthy of anything, he doesn't give himself competence. He doesn't apply competence to it. It's not serious enough to reflect high competence. So then he must believe that he is incompetent, right? Incompetent in that area. Now, it's Annie who challenges that notion, in a sense that when he's writing Misery Return, those first drafts, that this is beneath you and this is not what goes on, and I really know about the book, and you're going to have to rewrite these chapters, right? So you almost have to wonder, then, has he been writing these books the whole time? And I posed this question much earlier in the film analysis, but we don't know for certain. But it's interesting that the first drafts, he wouldn't want to showcase his talent. Okay. I don't know if Buster is measuring his competence compared to others, but it may be just implicit, or it may be obvious because he's the sheriff, and so he can stand behind the badge and say, I'm the sheriff and I know much more than you anyway. Even though he goes out and talks to the lodge manager, and he talks to the general store manager, and he talks to his wife in terms of if any more calls came in about Paul Sheldon. But there's an obvious sort of ego-based competence that Sheriff Buster has because he is the sheriff. He's the boss of the town in that sense, right? So he's going to measure his competence implicitly with everybody else simply because he has a title. And that's kind of in contrast to the fact that Paul Sheldon didn't have a title for his work to measure his competence and to measure his ego-based authority on the topic, right? Sheriff Buster represents authority, right? And the authority that he has wielded as sheriff. And even he thought he needed to be humble enough to read about Paul Sheldon to learn more about him, which means that he decided to increase his competence. But he's kind of more performance goal orientation in the fact that he is somewhat in the beginning more performance goal orientation. Applies a performance goal orientation because he's walking about like sheriff, and that I'm the authority, and so I'm not quite sure I need any much more than that. And then he adopts a learning goal orientation because he was willing to resolve his task difficulty. So he did have a fixed mindset at the beginning, but ended up with a growth mindset. So let's look at the side-by-side comparison. So the learning goal orientation, the adoption of learning goals is based on the intrinsic desire to learn and master content through personal effort. Learning goal adopters increase knowledge by utilizing a growth mindset. And then performance goal orientation, the adoption of performance goals is based on the necessity to compare oneself to others and their abilities. Performance goal adopters increase knowledge by utilizing a fixed mindset. So if we stay on the right column just for a minute, the fact that Sheriff Buster wouldn't ask anybody else for help other than just gaining some information about Annie Wilkes and what she's been buying from the general store manager, or looking at the sign-in sheet when Paul Sheldon came in. When Paul Sheldon came to the lodge and left the lodge, right? That he didn't need to increase his knowledge with that, because they basically gave him basic knowledge, right? And he didn't necessarily need to compare himself or contrast himself, because it was just obvious that he's the person with authority. But then he was willing to master content or utilize a growth mindset to try to solve the problem. So what is mindset? This is Carol Dweck. The title of her book is Mindset, The New Psychology of Success, How We Can Learn to Fulfill Our Potential. And she addresses 4 areas. So Carol Dweck defines mindset or mindset theory as the general belief we have about the underlying nature of personal abilities and our decisions. Some people exhibit a growth mindset in which they believe that abilities can be developed over time, while other people exhibit a fixed mindset in which they believe that abilities are static. Mindset is based on assumptions and methods and can inform one's worldview. So we base a lot of times whether or not we can resolve a task issue, resolve the difficulty of the task based upon our mindset, our worldview, whether or not we feel like we are capable and have the skills and tools and mindset to resolve it. So we either believe that if we fail this course, all we have to do is study harder to pass the course, then we are operating with the growth mindset. If we say, I'm not sure I can pass this course with an A or something like that, I'm not sure, I will ever be able to get these mathematical concepts to pass this course, then we are operating with a fixed mindset. So therefore, when we operate with a fixed mindset, we won't even try, because especially if we feel like failure is imminent. When you think about Annie, Annie must have felt that failure was imminent when she started strangling the babies. That she didn't feel like she was capable enough to understand and resolve the problem called crying babies, right? When she's having to deal with Paul Sheldon and he has written a different book that is not misery, she didn't know how to resolve that problem other than to trap him there and say, if I die, you die, right? Or to make him burn the book and then make him write a whole different book. That's how she resolved the problem. And then Sheriff Buster, I'm not going to be able to resolve this problem, or initially the only way to resolve this problem is to do things the way I'm used to doing things. When in reality he felt that he was not going to be able to solve it until he had to begin reading Paul Sheldon's works, and that's how he kind of overcame a fixed mindset and moved into a growth mindset. So understanding mindset, here's a bit of a wheel here. The nature of one's mindset is always determined by perception of intelligence and abilities, and whether abilities can be developed through effort, persistence, and learning from mistakes. Adopting and trying different strategies for learning is key to perceiving intelligence as developing over time and not simply as static. People who feel they are intelligent without much effortful learning tend to exhibit a fixed mindset about learning in general. In other words, they do not feel that learning is necessary and tend to focus on the possibility of failure if they improve their learning. Their abilities in the moment are important. So essentially, the person is tired of learning. There is nothing in the textbooks that allows for a nurse to strangle a baby. There's something in the textbooks that allows for a nurse to do CPR compressions or try to revive a baby, right? If the baby is unconscious or something like that. But there's nothing in the textbooks that suggests it is okay to strangle a baby. So Annie did not feel like she was competent enough to resolve the problem called crying baby. And she focused so much on the possibility of failure, meaning that the possibility of not being able to resolve the problem, that she stopped her learning. She only focused on the abilities that she could do in the moment that were prior to her actually strangling the baby, whatever. So nurses answer phones, nurses talk to patients, nurses administer, pills, they take vitals, things like that. Okay, she was basically operating with those assumptions. But when the baby started to cry, there was nothing in her background, nothing in her training that instructed her on how to resolve that problem. And so she wasn't interested in adopting and trying a different strategy for learning, which would have required her to talk to someone outside of herself and get help and get someone to show her how to rock a baby, how to talk to a baby, how to feed the baby, all the different things that are normal in terms of training. She wasn't willing to do that. With Paul Sheldon, it's kind of hard because Paul Sheldon has been writing the novel series, the Misery series, and it's hard to say if his learning is really static, because it seems like with each series he kind of improves upon himself. But his perception, though, is that he is static. that his writing is static. It is not something that he wants to be proud of and put on his tombstone, that he didn't plan on it becoming his life. And so he feels like he is static and not moving anywhere. Whereas the reading audience feels like he's moving. You know, the fact that he has written multiple books in the series feels like for them that he's moving. So it's interesting about his mindset. And then Sheriff Buster's mindset, I don't think he necessarily fears failure. I think he's just confused about the task and how to solve it. And that he basically realizes he's not going to be able to solve it the way that he thinks. So through effort and persistence and learning from his mistakes, he's willing to change his mindset from fixed to growth. So in looking at the wheel, the nature of mindsets, habits of mind created by experiences, create blind spots, self-deceptive, shape our lives, shape our world, can be developed, can be transcended. And the fact that Annie is willing to put her hands on a baby and strangle the baby tells you a lot about her worldview and how her life is shaped and how she shapes the world. Because as soon as she does that and the babies die, she shapes the parents whose baby has died, right? She shapes the hospital. She shapes the laws. Even though strangling babies is not in the academic textbook, at least in terms of training, it might become part of the academic textbook because of the court case. And it's definitely in the law books and in the legislation on what to do with attempted murder or something like that, right? So she shapes the world, she shapes the life of the people around her. I often note in a previous frame, why is it that Sheriff Buster is not really engaging Annie Wilkes, right? I also say in a previous frame, why isn't Paul Sheldon engaging the town? Because had he had dinner with the sheriff, or had he had dinner with the townsperson, or even the lodge manager, or even visited the general store manager and saw Annie Wilkes get his books, the general store manager would have whispered something in his ear, in Paul Sheldon's ear, about Annie Wilkes. But that's kind of like a blind spot for him, that he'll come to a town and write for 6 weeks on end at a time, but not know the town, right? That's his habit, but he's not learning about the world around him. And and the fact that he's missing is now shaping the very world that he enters and exits all the time, right? And so mindset matters, because you might say Paul Sheldon has a fixed mindset about the town he visits. I don't really need to know the people. You know, I just really need to know this lodge. I'm just here to write a book and then I'm out. Okay? I don't need to know much more than that. But the people care about you. The people in that town are reading audience members, right? They know you are in town, and you don't care enough to know them. And so that represents a fixed mindset, that he's not willing to know anything other than his goal, which is still important. You can't knock him for having a goal to finish the book, but it's interesting that he's not willing to know any more than what he knows, right? That's why I say he's kind of like Buster in the beginning, Sheriff Buster in the beginning, that he's only willing to know his ways of thinking. And until he's pressed in his mind about learning something about Paul Sheldon, he wasn't going to change, right? And then Annie Wilkes, of course, is just not going to change at all. And we see in the end that she doesn't change. And so the novel, and I mean, the film basically kills her off. It's like um, it's like judge, jury, and executioner. You are not willing to learn anything beyond your misery, so there's no sense in you remaining in the world. So this is, I took another screenshot of um, the characteristics of a fixed mindset and characteristics of a growth mindset. If you type in fixed mindset, growth mindset, visuals, graphics, you will find different types. And so I always, I don't use this one all the time for my classes, but this is the one I could find. So the fixed mindset is you believe intelligence and talent are fixed. You believe effort is fruitless. You believe failure really defines who you are. You hide your flaws. You avoid challenges. You ignore feedback. You view feedback as personal criticism, and you feel threatened by others' success. Think about the fact that Annie challenged Paul Sheldon to burn his book and rewrite or write Misery's Return. And the problem with Annie is that she had a problem with the serious work that was on title. She had a problem with that, but she doesn't have the talent for writing to understand that you can transition from writing the Misery Chastain series into writing more serious work. She believes then that intelligence is fixed, is static. It can't be transitioned. It can't move from something else, move from one thing to the other. And I think on some level, Annie wanted to write. She's so inclined to write. And authors have always said that the best way to learn how to write or to become a better writer is reading. And so she was already starting the process by reading, but she wasn't putting her hands to work to begin writing. And so her effort, there's no sense in putting in the effort, right? Um, when she lives in misery or in isolation, that's Annie believing that failure defines who she is, right? She's hiding some flaws that she has. She avoids challenges. She ignores any kind of feedback. When Paul Sheldon was trying to tell her that that's the way slum kids talk, how they use profanity in the new book that he was writing, he had written, she didn't want to hear it. Paul Sheldon was trying to teach her, even if he wasn't directly trying to teach her. He was trying to teach her something in that moment, and she ignored it. And in some ways, she looked at it as personal criticism. And then, of course, I think on some level, she felt threatened by his success. And then characteristics of a growth mindset: you believe intelligence and talents can be developed. You believe effort is the path to mastery. You believe mistakes are part of learning. You view failure as an opportunity. You believe failures are temporary. You embrace challenges. You welcome feedback. You view others' success as inspirational. And I think this best characterizes Buster, the one who was operating in my mind, in my view, as housing a fixed mindset. That the intelligence that he lacked was that professional sort of expanded competence. And at that time, he didn't really have time to go and take a course, a continuing education course, but he was willing to buy the books and learn to improve his intelligence on the topic of Paul Sheldon, right? And so therefore, had he lived, he might have decided to do much more with his professional career. And so he put in the effort to learn about Paul Sheldon, to master their understanding. And the mistakes are part. Now, I don't think that he learned fully because he didn't ask for help. So that's where he made a mistake. But the failure to really understand the job was an opportunity for him to learn. He embraced the challenge. That's a big challenge, having to read all those books. The feedback was kind of implicit, you know, and then view others' success as inspirational. Well, he thought Paul Sheldon's work was worth reading, you know. All right, like, subscribe, and visit. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell for more discussions. You can visit my YouTube channel for further film analysis. It's Favorites Film Analysis as the title of the channel. You can always send me an email and ask me a question, reginayfavorites@yahoo.com. My Overcoming Setback, 5 Keys for Entering and Exiting Correction book will become available around October 2021. I'm still doing some editing. The book does not focus on film analyses, but I use the content that I created for the book to support my my perceptions of setback used as a theme in select films. So when the book becomes available, I will send out a notification video, audio. Thank you very much for visiting the channel.